Okay, great. Yeah, well, thanks a lot for inviting me. It's really exciting to be here. And some of the stuff I'm going to be talking about in the first 10 minutes is something that most people probably do anyway, but from an academic context, perhaps it's not so well researched. So the first 10 minutes, I'm just going to talk about more kind of reflections, and the second half, I'm going to hopefully play you some stuff of what I'm working with, okay? So first of all, I'm just going to talk about who am I and what I'm doing. Then I'm going to have some reflections on the UN Ocean Decade and Art Science collaborations, and then talk a bit about the Polar Sounds project, which we've just started currently. So I use this picture. This picture I took this is in Swansea, where I'm from, in South Wales, and this bridge was really dilapidated during COVID. But still, people went on it. So it was actually really difficult to get on the bridge. You had to climb up numerous ways, and it wasn't really easy accessible. And for years, the British Port Authority had let it just completely go to waste. But I think it's a good pick. So I did this project then, going down there every day. The dry dock is in the back where my great-great-grandfather used to work, and he actually died by falling into the dry dock. And so this place has a lot of historical resonance for me. But I went down into this project reflecting on daily life down the pier. But I think it's a good example to highlight maybe some of the things that people have already talked about, but why potentially we are here as well. So in the foreground, you've got the research ship coming into port, which we could say is the scientist. That represents the scientist, the research. Then here you can see this gentleman here and people in the background fishing. They can represent everyday people, okay? And then if we have a problem, say for example in this image, it's the rubbish, what I'm going to try and do over the next 3 years is trying to think about how we can connect those three, the science, the people, and the potential problems we have, which is obviously what MTF Labs is all about. And it's really exciting to have these conversations with you guys now during the week and try to think about how we go about doing this. So a bit about me. I've just started a postdoc as an artist researcher in the Alfred Wegener Institute for Polar Marine Research in North Germany and the Helmholtz Institute for Functional Marine Biodiversity. And what I'm doing, I'm going to be mixing my background as a musician, songwriter, sound artist, and filmmaker with my background as a political and cultural geographer to reflect on some of these issues. And particularly, the question I'm really interested in is how we might make space for collaborations across disciplines to help the public engage the ongoing crisis of the sea and ensure that this important scientific work is more widely shared. And the main way I'm going to be doing this, so basically I'm going to be in the Alfred Wegener Institute. There's an ocean acoustics group, and they monitor climate change, they monitor the health of the oceans through recording sound. So primarily, I'm going to be working with them to create a bunch of art installations that help us communicate with the public over the next
Recording
3 years.
in progress.
That's good to know. And obviously, art is one way we can do this, okay? How we create these conversations. I don't know if everyone knows, I'm sure everyone does, but this decade we're into now is the UN Ocean Decade. And one of the main aims of the UN Ocean Decade is to confront humanity's relationship with the ocean by identifying and overcoming barriers to behavioural change, okay? I think behavioural change is something really important in this talk in the first 10 minutes anyway, because they want us to create an inspiring and engaging ocean for society, okay? And I know that sounds like quite a grand narrative, okay? And I'm going to go into deeper why that is quite a difficult thing to do. But that idea of behavioural change is something that they want to enact, okay? So from an artistic perspective then, we start to think, okay, is that something we can do as artists, as scientists? Can we actually enact behavioural change, and how can we even measure this if this is even possible? And that's basically what I'm going to reflect on now. So why do we do art science collaborations? I know everyone in this room will know that, but obviously they do a lot more than this, but two ways we find them interesting is one is a way of creating new spaces for communication. So in other words, ways for us to talk about our impactful and our interesting research, but rather than just doing an academic paper that no one's going to read and a policy paper that no one's going to read, how do we get it out to the public? And art is one of the ways we can do that. And then this is another way which is really interesting because, especially the presentation just before what you were talking about, how can we create possibly new ways to do science when we put artists and scientists in a room together? And this is really exciting this week because we're going to bring people together just doing it for the sake of finding new ways of discovery, okay? New ways to do science. So these are two of the ways that are really exciting. But I'm going to concentrate more on the public consumption kind of aspect and just put on some reflections and ask some questions, really. So, if the goal of the UN Ocean Decade is not only be about learning, but also societal change, should art-science collaborations also appeal to do the same? So in other words, the UN Ocean Decade are pumping millions and billions of pounds into trying to change people's behaviour. Can we do the same with art? Well, as we're going to reflect on now, that's actually it's a question that poses a lot of problems, but a lot of challenges, okay? The first thing we need to ask is, if they're telling us that the science we need for the ocean we want, the problem with the term we is it becomes universalizing catch-all term for society at large, erasing difference, okay? So that brings up questions like who gets to make art, who is it for, and what its purpose. I think it's a bit naive for us to think, oh, humanity, we're all doing this for humanity, because we know there's various stratifications of politics and representation. So creating art for an ocean we all care about should always begin, I think, by asking which we is targeted every time we do a project, okay? Because that is something we really need to highlight. And this then opens questions like, who do artists and scientists work with? What is created and why? Where should it be displayed? Who is involved in the process? And who gets to engage with the output? These are important questions that we should be thinking about during the UN Ocean Decade when we're trying to target the ocean we want. Well, who exactly is the we, okay? Who gets to engage with the output? What do we do with this? And this is not an easy thing to do. What is behavioural change, right? So if we have a piece of art and we say, okay, we want it to enact behavioural change, how do you measure the behavioural change? How do you measure whether someone's behaviour has actually changed, okay? What is the behaviour that we're trying to change? What do people already know? What's their motivation to change? Whose responsibility? And the final question there, coming back to this idea, who is the we, is change even within their power? And this is why it's really interesting to come this week, this idea of, chatting to the policymakers and the people who actually make the decisions. How can we use art-science collaborations to actually highlight those various stratifications of power? But when it comes to the public, if we're creating art that goes out to the public to change people's perceptions, do they even have the power, first of all, to actually change behaviour? Or where should we be looking, in other words? So these are the questions I think we need to be asking. By the way, I don't necessarily have any answers, so, but that's maybe something we can come up with by the end of the week, if there are any answers whatsoever. And another problem with this is longitudinal research. How can we know the long-term impacts an exhibition has on someone without spending a significant period of time monitoring their lives? You might create an exhibition, ask someone before they go in, what do you know about this thing? Show them something, then afterwards we ask, okay, did that change your attitude on that thing? They say yes. What do we do with that then? How do we keep that long-term relationship going? And a lot of you, I'm sure, are working on these things and are doing these things all the time, but surprisingly, when it comes to academic research, and especially to do with art science collaborations in the ocean, these kind of stuff about process is really missing, and it's not really highlighted, and it's something that needs to be highlighted. So, 3 things I think are important when we think about art science collaborations in the ocean. First of all is the importance of emotion, considering measuring self-efficacy and emotional involvement, trying to get people to care about the sea, because you can tell people that the sea needs to be saved, whatever that means, but unless people care enough about it. So how do we bring emotion into the ocean, okay? I think that's a really important thing we should reflect on considerably, because the better understanding we understand the ways that people emotionally connect with the ocean, the better we can possibly do at targeting them and developing relationships that can reflect on how we use art as a way of bridging these gaps, okay? 2 is proximity and distance. As I say, oceanic art can transport those living miles away from the ocean deep into the sea, provide an extension of oceanic worlds in what Peters and Steinberg called ocean in excess, okay? So how do our projects create those gaps and maybe extend beyond the spaces and places that we are immediately in? How might the stuff that we create today be applicable to people living in Behavioural, but then applicable to people living right in the center of Europe? Is it different? How do we go about developing these differences and thinking about how we approach art science collaborations? And then the final bit is community engagement. Projects must consider how its output can be shared. So this idea, obviously, like what of us are already doing, is how we actually become co-creators rather than coercers, okay? So rather than just coercing people, this is what we're doing. How do we create together? How do we share this important information and make sure that it's applicable in numerous ways? So that's just the first kind of half of the presentation, just me reflecting on some of these things that over the next 3 years I'm going to be thinking about if the UN Ocean Decade is all about behavioural change, then how do we actually measure this? And if that's even possible through art-science collaborations. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's just the fact that we're doing something and having the conversation is enough. But I'm not so sure. I don't know. And maybe that's something we can talk about and try and think of long-term ways that we can measure how art-science collaborations can be impactful for a significant period of times and create real change, whatever real change is. So, anyway, so this is more fun stuff now. Yeah, so how I'm doing this is through sound. And I've been doing it for 6 months now, and I've got a 3-year contract. And the first thing we've been doing is this Polar Sounds project. And so the Ocean Acoustics group that I work with at the Alfred Wegener Institute and the HIFMB, we collect essentially the polar sounds of the Arctic and Antarctic seas. So obviously they do a lot of ocean research, but there's one branch that listen to the acoustics. And so over the next 3 years, I'm just going to be doing a bunch of stuff with those acoustic sound, and how then we can go about and create relationships with different community groups. But the first project we did, I don't know if anyone's heard of Cities in Memory in here. It's like a sound map. It's a really cool project. Stuart Folks does it from the UK. And basically a sound map. You should really check it out, Cities in Memory. And anyone can upload a sound, and then anyone can artistically reinterpret that sound. Now, I've done a project in the past for Cities in Memory, and then I was looking at the map and realized they didn't have any sounds for the Arctic and Antarctic. So I approached Stuart and said, look, we've got a bunch of really cool sounds. How about we do a project? And so a few months ago, we put out a shout open to everyone in the world, essentially. And I say in the world because it was on Twitter. We put it through all our contacts, and this goes back to who gets to create art, right? But I'm happy to talk about those problematic relationships on who do we reach and how do we reach people afterwards. And yeah, so there's this system called Opus, and hopefully at one point in the future it's going to be accessible to everyone. And it's basically the data from the hydrophones that various scientists collect, putting it on this big map, and eventually everyone will be able to download those songs and use them. That's the hope anyway. And I don't know if people know much about hydrophone collecting in the Antarctic, at least. It's a very long process. They put a hydrophone under the ocean, and it takes maybe a year or maybe 2 years till it comes back. When it does come back, sometimes the batteries didn't work, and then you've only got 3 months of data. But it's a very laborious, long process. And unfortunately, although you can have live streams, they do take a lot of money and a lot of maintenance. So the general way that it's approached at the moment is just putting a hydrophone in the water, picking it back in a year's time, and then assessing the data afterwards. But anyway, we had 275 applications from over 45 countries, and we picked 103 artists to basically just do whatever they wanted. And then there's going to be an academic element to this. So when we get all the compositions in now, everyone got to pick a sound, and I went through the Opus system, and these sounds were from mammals to glaciers melting to anthropogenic sounds, so ships, etc. And everyone had one sound each, and then they had to reinterpret that sound creatively, and we're all getting them in now, so the program's almost finished. So eventually we're going to release all the different compositions, and the reason we did this was a way for people to reinterpret the data that the scientists use every day creatively to see what we find, okay? And from the academic perspective, we're going to interview all the artists to see, how they reinterpreted these sounds, how it made them feel, this idea of emotion. And then we're going to interview the bioacoustic team and to see how it might play them the tracks and the compositions and see how it might make them think differently about the sounds that they actually work with every day, okay? And then we're going to do public engagement and stuff, and some events coming up soon with people in the surrounding area. So yeah, my piece, I did a piece, and talking about emotions in the ocean, this idea of ocean storytelling. How can we tell stories about the ocean as a creative method to reinterpret sounds? And so hopefully I can play you a piece what I've done. This is the first time I've ever played it to anyone, so I apologise if you think it's not very good. But what I did, so the sound that I picked was the air gun, right? And the air gun is it's a ship, basically. Ships go past in the Arctic, and they shoot a pulse looking for the oil and gas. So they shoot a massive pulse, comes back, tells us the information where the oil and gas is. As the Arctic sea ice melts, that means that more and more ships and air guns are going to come and looking for oil and gas, okay? So when I heard these sounds, I was like, okay, what does this sound like? I heard this sound, so I was like, to me, it sounds like a bomb. So what I did, I then started thinking this narrative, okay, it's not just, impactful to us, but what's it like for the mammals under the water? Did some research, and although the research is still very much in its early days, it is suggested that these air guns are detrimental for whales and certain mammals, masking their communications, masking their way that they can travel. And so I started thinking about creating a story related to what if we could do, in 10 years' time when the Arctic shipping lanes are busier and busier, that's me, how then if we could talk to the whales in the future, what would they say? And so I'm from a place called Swansea, like I said at the beginning, which was bombed quite heavily during the Second World War. It was a port city. And I went through the archives back then and found some conversations of the people talking about the devastation of the bombing on the city of Swansea. And so I've used those interviews from the archives as if we're talking to the whales, okay? And hopefully this will play. Okay, yeah. So can I ask you to do something as well? Can I ask everyone to close their eyes for two reasons? This is a sound piece, right? So I want you to be immersed in the sound and imagine yourself on the storytelling, okay? And then secondly, because I don't want you to look at me, okay? Because that would be really awkward because I've never played this for anyone before. So if I see looks of disgust on your face, then, I'd rather not see your eyes as well. Right, okay, so everyone got their eyes closed. Immerse yourself now. We're under the water. Well, we're not under the water quite yet. We're going under the water soon. We will be under the water soon, so this is my piece. It's called First Contact, okay?
Hello to you, wherever you are in the world. What you are about to hear is something that has never been heard before. Using cutting-edge translation technology, scientists have conducted the world's first interview with a humpback whale community from the Arctic. In this extract from the conversation, the whales discuss the impact that industrial-scale seismic airgun oil and gas surveys has had on them and their homes. Airguns produce a pulse of sound that can spread from tens to hundreds of kilometers under the ocean. We never knew the extent of the damage until now. The next voices you will hear will be those of the whales.
The main bombing was continuously in the same area. You had to be so careful. The highway had been hit there badly with a bomb, which I found I had to divert again. So frightening.
And when they were passing, and I heard it come down, and their all got a direct hit.
When the siren went, when the warning went, it was an up and down wailing noise. You'd hear one siren start, and then within seconds others would pick up the chorus until you'd have, I suppose, at least 8 or 10, perhaps 6 or 8 anyway, different wailing sirens going off in the whole area.
A few bombs fell.
And about 3 or 4 explosions. But on this particular occasion, the water was absolutely blood red.
So on the first night, they had such a battering really that they came out. What sort of time did they come out then? Is it in the afternoon? Or what?
Oh no, about 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening, because I suppose they were so frightened that the bombing would start somewhere in around that time in the evening part, that they were coming out as soon as they could, really.
They all changed back in the morning, did they?
Well, they had to go back, I suppose, after the bombing had finished and the air raid was over, that they went back to see what damage their houses had been done, you see.
So you got home that night, that morning safely.
The start of the really severe bomb damage. The main school completely demolished.
Quite a lot of damage and quite a number of casualties in that particular area.
But this was the sort of thing that impinged itself very much on a child's consciousness.
Okay, so that is the piece. Thank you. So just to finish, thank you. Yeah, so obviously that was the sound of the air guns. And can you see that on your screen? Nope. Yeah, just to finish, when you're thinking about ecosystem living, so every sound is a politics and can reveal power relations across society. So yeah, when we're thinking about these sounds and those sounds, the sounds that we work with every day, how can we really understand the politics of them and then reflect that story? The power of emotions in storytelling, I think, is really important, and how getting people to care about art-science collaborations. Because I've been approached in the past with scientists saying, you know, let's do an art-science collaboration. But going back to the initial question at the beginning, I think Jan mentioned it, is, you know, why are you doing this? What is the point of doing this? I think it's really important. Place matters. As a geographer, I think that's really important, you know. Back to this idea of oceans in excess, how can we create connections beyond places and within places, and then how do we maintain longevity? So how, when we do create art-science collaborations, how do we create connections that last more than just the product itself, and then, you know, we forget about it. But yeah, thanks a lot for the invite. I'm really excited for the week to come, and tomorrow I'll be playing some more polar sounds and stuff in the brainstorming thing, which hopefully you guys can play about with as well, so that'll be quite cool. But yeah, thank you very much.